Hey everybody, welcome back to the Devout Route with Pastor Mick Veach. I'm your host, Michael Braden, and with me as always is Pastor Mick. How you doing today, Mick?
Great. Good to be with you, Michael.
Always. And for today's episode, we have a great topic, which is the future of the church. We're going to be looking at different generations, right? I'm a millennial. You're Gen X, right, Mick?
That's right.
And we're going to be talking about kind of what the future of the church looks like. The younger generation, right? Gen Z, even I think about my kids, they're like Gen Alpha and Beta. Like it's crazy all the different names. But we just kind of want to look at what the future of the church looks like. What do you see in the younger generations? And is this the doom and gloom that the world kind of makes it with the future of our culture? So just kind of to begin that topic, what do you see as kind of like the biggest differences when you look at the younger generations?
Interesting that we look at this topic because, Michael, just you and I sitting here and them viewing us, which I'm glad you all are able to view us. And if you're just listening to us, I would encourage you to go to the video portion of this, whatever platform you're on, because Michael here, is a millennial, and look how cool he is, right? And look at the way he's dressed, and I'm a Gen X, and look at the way I'm dressed. You can see the distinctions. But there's distinctions, right? There's distinctions of cultures because of generations. Let me just say this, is that I think the first challenge we have when we look at the future of the church and the various generations is that we all are drawn to what I call sameness clusters. Sameness clusters, meaning we like to be around people that think like us, look like us, act like us, and that's so natural to us. We see in churches that happens all the time, right? And you know the difference between a church that is open and a church that is closed. No church that is closed knows that they're closed, but if you visit that, you'll know immediately by what? Their language, their openness, their hospitality, their friendliness, and then because they like to be around people that they know and that have similar values and similar history, etc. I think that is just human nature. And I think we've said that often here at the church here. For those of you tuning in, I'm a pastor at KCC, which is Kentwood Community Church right here in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And we are a church that literally, because the reason why I'm telling you is because these both are connected. We live in a city, Kentwood, that has 105 languages. The nations have literally arrived here. And we could literally hunker down into our sameness clusters and never engage people that are culturally different than us. It's the same with generations. We do the exact same thing. We hunker down, and then when we don't engage each other, and the word that we've really emphasized here and in my own life, and I think you have, Michael's, one word. It's called intentionality. If we're going to deal with the future of the church and we're going to deal with the various generations, we're going to have to get to the point where we actually are intentional. It will never be natural for most. There might be exceptions to the rule. Have you ever met those people where they're just so extroverted and they're so curious and they're so crossing over their various cultures and their generations that they engage? But I don't think that's normal.
Yeah, they're few and far between as far as the people. But that is a good point. I think, we think of, you use it as sameness clusters. We think about that from like a cultural or an ethnic aspect. But really, like you said, when it comes to generationally, we do that also because it's easier, right? People, they understand the lingo, the language. I think of like, I get to that age where you start using phrases from when you were younger and people are like, what does that mean? And they're like, no one says that.
Well, I think the reality is, Michael, I'm going to use a fancy word here, is we're all ethnocentric. And ethnocentric is simply the understanding that we believe that our way of doing it is better than anybody else's. My wife and I lived overseas. Let me illustrate this way. We would go to a certain village. And each village in this country in which we lived, they made their own homemade bread. Great bread, by the way. But as you would go to them and eat their homemade bread or their various foods that they would cook, they would say to us, oh, the village over there, it isn't anything like ours. Even though it's probably less than 20 kilometers, theirs is the best bread. What do I mean by that? We do that with our generations. We think our generation is the best. Our generation did it the best. You may have your few people, but generally speaking, I'm saying generally speaking, that's where we land because that's been our experience, right? And we think our generation is the best music. I still razz my kids. Like I said, the 70s and 80s music is the best.
I mean, I appreciate good 80s music, but I mean, I'm with you on it. I do agree that I feel like millennial is the generation that has, like, everything went downhill after that. I'm just saying, but I see what you're saying.
Yes,
When it comes to music, arts, all that, we definitely are biased to our own generation.
And if we continue to live blind to that, can you imagine as we often say that the church is one generation away from extinction. That's been being said for a long time, long before me, and because the statement is true. And if we don't and are not intentional, we all of a sudden the church gets old. When I came to this church, I was very open. And almost 6 years ago, my first analysis of this amazing church with many years of great ministries, I said, this church is old. Didn't mean it didn't have young people, but predominantly it was led and the vast majority of people that attended were probably 40 and up. And we've made a turn. It doesn't mean we didn't have young people, but we were in danger. You got to have a nice balance of generations to be able to engage that. And so I think intentionality is key with all this. I think that secondly is that we think our way of doing it is better, but I also believe that every generation has blind areas. We're a product of the way we were raised. On a macro level and on a micro level. What do I mean by that? On a macro level, we all in our generation we were all educated a certain way. Like when I was young, private school, homeschool, all that was very rare. And so everybody went to public. Secondly, we didn't have as much money. So what we had to do with the thought in my generation was we went to Pizza Hut every now and then, and it was $20 for the five of us, and we thought that was the greatest. We didn't have any money because you got paid $200 a week. So if you're paying your bills, and the bills were way lower, obviously, but we didn't have access to we weren't I would declare us a restaurant culture. We've been a restaurant culture for probably 20 plus years. But when I was a younger lad, we had restaurants, but just it wasn't normal. You didn't go out to eat all the time. It was the exception. That's just as an example of what we economically just didn't live at the standard of living just soared through the 80s, and for the last 40 years it's continued to soar. And then our children don't know any different because that's the only thing they've ever experienced. And so we sometimes can have look at them because of their upbringing and say, we had it better than you because we worked harder than you.
I think those points you make about the cultural aspect is so true, but I want to shift it now. You know, we talked about the general culture in the different generations. So now from the church standpoint, I know you get a lot of people that's kind of like, no offense, but the doom and gloom kind of Gen X people where they're like, oh, the church is, it's falling apart. They're lazy. They don't do anything. Like, we're falling away from God. But what has been your view of, as a lead pastor, of the younger generations that you've seen in the church? Well,
I think that every generation has their strengths and their weaknesses. We have to first call that out, right? There's nobody's. We know that we were born into a fallen world, and as a result, we're products of that particular culture. So the problem is, like you just stated, in the church, is that we can hyper focus on the weaknesses of a particular generation, and as a result of that, offend each other in such a way. So the thing that I'm most concerned about is that I've watched churches actually segregate over generations. So we say, oh, we got an old church. When we talk about an old church, that's a church that's dying off because they're not attracting anybody that will revive that. And then you got the hip church, and they're all in their 20s, and most of them are single and not married and kids. And as soon as your peers get married, the game changes, right?
Or the two separate services, right?
Yeah,
like
and you have two services. So you got the young adult church, you got the old church that are actually separate, and you got a church where you may have both of them attending. Then you separate them inside the church. So we've tried to accommodate the differences rather than marry them together and to come together. I have often said that it's going to take the maturity of the older generation not because they're better than the younger generation, but they should be more mature simply because they have lived longer life. Now, let me just speak to that for a moment. Wisdom, there's two kinds of wisdoms in the world. There's the godly wisdom that God gives every believer, and it does not, it's not a respecter of age. So an 8-year-old could grant one of your children could give you incredible wisdom from God. Doesn't matter the age, which is beautiful. And then you have the wisdom of life or age. Now, what we hope in our life is that we bring those two together. Wisdom of life, the wisdom of God, and then you get this incredible moment of living a mature life. And then those folks move alongside the people that may have the godly wisdom, but are still gaining the life wisdom in their 30s and their 40s. And so, are we doing that as a church, or are we repelling one another by looking at our differences because we're so different? But I believe the older generation should begin to become more flexible because they are trying to pass the baton off to the next generation.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point you raised too. I feel like I see often where the older generation kind of has this idea that they just woke up and knew how to be quote unquote good Christians, but it's like, no, they had a generation before them that taught them and poured into them. So it's like, instead of looking down the younger generations, as you were saying, use that wisdom and share it to encourage them and help them mature and grow so that they can, be the hands and feet of the church going forward.
Well, I think the challenge has been, it's twofold. The older generation in the church has critiqued and criticized the younger generation with the obvious things. Oh, they're not committed. Oh, they're lazy. They're not respectful, and some of those are true. But not look at all the great the millennials and the Gen Z bring that we need, the strengths they bring. But then on the other side of the coin, the millennials and the Gen Z don't show the respect. They throw away. We live in a culture, Michael, where we throw away age.
Absolutely, yeah, especially in America.
We spend billions of dollars, billions literally, to stay young. Why? Why not embrace your age? Why the greatest compliment is what? Oh, you don't look your age.
Yeah, so much younger, right?
Is that not a compliment?
That is 100% true.
Why is that a compliment? Why do I want to look young, right? So the point of the matter is that those are the realities, is that both sides have adverse interactions with one another by throwing away all of the age, and the age not engaging the younger. Actually, I just came back from a holiday, and when I was there, one of the things in our church that I'm going to begin to engage, that I've not said to anybody actually, but right here, is there's books about various stages we go in our generations. I'm actually entering in very soon, in a couple years, the sage stage. And the sage stage is probably, I think, the most powerful stage of our life journey. And I'm going to develop at this church how we can bring together people from 60 to 85 years of age and actually call them the sage group and be able to train them and have them proactively engage people that are millennials and Gen Z and maybe even younger Gen X folks from all variety of life, like marriage, career, child raising, working in the marketplace, standing up for Jesus, how to I go through hurt, pain, and suffering, all the things they've experienced and coming along, where they failed, where they succeeded. But I am going to actually create, it goes back to our word in the church, future church, we have to be intentional. This is not natural. We stay in our sameness clusters. It will take leadership to actually pull these together and be able to engage that. So I'm excited about bringing our differences together. Let me give you a second example. This week, I believe, I don't think you're going to be in this meeting because you are too old. But the executive team of this church, I know, the executive team of this church is going to have a sit-down meeting, a listening meeting with everybody 35 and under. I called that meeting because what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to say for the future of the church is we need to take the strengths of my generation. I'm Gen X. I'm the oldest of Gen X. And our staff, which would be Gen Z, most of them, the younger ones, and take their strengths and then take those two strengths and combine them together. Can we do that? That's my question. Let's hear their strengths. Let's talk about their weaknesses. Let's talk about our weaknesses. And let's actually, instead of repelling each other, let's actually come together. We're doing the same thing by being a church of nearly 60 nations, are we not? We're saying people from all over the world are coming to our church, and they bring from their culture very positive things that we may not have in the American culture, right? And we embrace that. Let me give a shout out to one of our pastors, Pastor Giscard, who is a refugee. My mother's husband died this past week, and I had to do the funeral in Indiana. Pastor Giscard, his wife Chanel, and his 3 kids surprised me and drive all the way to Indiana. They did not know anybody there except me, my wife, and Christian and Michaela. And they came, didn't know anybody, sat through the... Why? Because in their culture, from the Republic of Congo, this is what you do. You honor your lead pastor who you work for, and you, in their midst of grief, you go there. And so I say, wow, these are... I look at that and say, wow, we don't really do that as Americans. I'm not saying they're better. I'm just saying this is an attribute that can we at KCC bring these strengths and actually combine them for the kingdom of God, for the Church of Jesus Christ. So as when we talk about the generations, Gen Z and all of these, can we do this? I'm a very much so an idealist, so I really believe and have hope that this is possible, but let's see. There would be the naysayers that say it's not possible. We just have to go in our lanes, engage it. Because that's, if you really are a realist, that's the really way it functions, isn't it, Michael? Right. We hang in our groups, and we even do our community groups that way, right? Should we change that? It's a question to ask. Is there something that's powerful if I know you and your wife and kids are in a community group, if you had a couple of empty nesters in your group, would that work? Yeah. Is it possible? But even though we're trying to be intentional here, we have set up our situations in such a way.
Yeah, and I think kind of how you were speaking on just the reality of seeing those strengths in each generation and not just focusing on the negative, but not only that, but how can I come alongside and bring our strengths together? I think a great example of this that, we've seen lately, and I know, you have some older generation that they're just going to be pessimistic no matter what, and the doom and gloom. But I feel like a great evidence to the reality that no matter what generation God is still moving is in the amount of revivals we've seen and just, across college campuses and from these younger generations. And you see more and more statistics coming out that the younger generations, Gen X and Z, they have a hunger for God, for truth. They want authentic worship. They want real relationships. Like being in your season of like what has that been for you to see that kind of revival and stuff happening in people so young?
It says something to the power of the Gen Z population that are hungry for God. Remember me telling you what I grew up with? Gen X, we didn't have a lot of money. So we began to get focused on our jobs and our careers and climb the economic ladder. So money becomes, even among Christians, we won't say it, becomes a big, big deal. So we worked to that end. Like, let's achieve, it's about getting this, and this. And there's nothing wrong with that in of itself, but that's how we were driven. And so we were very driven by those things, and it doesn't deliver. So your generation, millennials and Gen Z, you've watched us from your generation and go, I don't know that I accept that or that's the end goal. And so my end goal is not to work. I work so that I can have the finances to live life, and I believe the Gen Z bring that, right? So they really desire relationships, authentic relationships. So churches that don't foster deep relationships, but this very surfacey relationship, very don't get to know me, but just kind of say surface conversations. I think Gen Z say no, we don't want that. We want deep relationships. We want authentic worship services. We don't want the canned, because we came out of, and you're old enough to know, out of the whole seeker-sensitive movement where everything on Sunday morning had to be perfect. And there were some positives of that movement, by the way. I think it brought forth verbiage that we needed, the outsiders, anybody could come in, that we would make it understandable, friendly. I think those are, and being outwards focused, I think those are great things. But I think we then took it too far about performance, about everything but looking perfect, about it all being a canned thing, and then people that are moving towards God can see through that and say that's not real. So we have intentionally here strived in relationships and in our worship service to be more organic, more authentic, more go with the flow, but still put our best foot forward, which then kind of is being taught by who? The Gen Z, which goes back to your question about the hunger of Gen Z. I encourage you to Google, to research what is happening with that generation if you don't know. Michael, why don't you give them a little bit, even yourself, what's happening across the country with Gen Z?
Yeah, I think, if you haven't heard any of the stories, there's kind of this revival spirit with all these younger generations where they're really, like Mick said, going back to authentic worship, and they're really seeking to just honor God. And we're seeing, you think the countless college campuses where people are having just hours and hours of worship services, and people, right, we see stories, even that people that we know driving long distances to these college campuses to be a part of these services, and just to hear their reaction and the authenticity, and they really feel the Spirit of God moving. Like it harkens back to what you were saying, that these younger generations, they don't care about it being perfect. They don't care about the glitz and glamour. They want to truly feel God. And I think it's also a reflection of the culture, because our culture is so fake, right? It's all about hiding, having a mask on, having this perception of everything is awesome. And, these kids are growing up in there, they know that's not the truth. So now they take it to their faith and say, well, is that what God is like?
I think it's pretty powerful what you're saying, because I believe politically what's happened with in America and then with Gen Z is that we are slowly no longer Christianity, the driving force behind our country. That was my generation. We were. And so Gen Z is like, we're a minority. And so you have politically and social movements that are anti anything biblical. And so for that generation to truly authentically follow Jesus, you're going to be in the minority. Right. You're going to be looked upon as strange. That you're going to be rejected. That's our biggest fear, isn't it, Michael? Be rejected. That's why we don't share our faith. We don't want to be rejected, right? Gen Z, to follow Jesus, simply follow Jesus, you're going to be rejected in amongst the majority of people. So maybe that's a blessing in disguise, in that they could be, only God knows, they could be the final generation to bring the return of Christ. They could be the ones that will stand against the greatest opposition in our country. Now, we know globally, and we'll talk about these in other podcasts, what's happening globally with persecution is off the charts. But in America, we're seeing a shifting, and I believe what God's doing, he's raising up maybe not as many, but a remnant, a strong remnant of Gen Z and younger millennials that are all in, hungry for God, and are so bold in their faith, because the middle ground is starting to be lost, right? And because Christianity is seen in a negative light by culture because of politics, and saying and we can talk about this later, about Christian nationalism and whoever the president is, and what, because of our walk away from truth, how we can create our own brand of Christianity, like what we believe. And I think that generation is actually bringing authentic, devoted truth. They're going to have their issues, but I believe, and it's my responsibility in my now moving into most of the boomers are dying off, and moving into that season, that we give them all the tools and give them all the opportunities to grow, where they can be nurtured, mentored, and not just thrown to the wolves, but little by little getting a chance to lead and have opportunities. That's the cry of my heart as a leader, is to do that. One of my mentors asked me the other day, so what do you see yourself in 12 years? I'd be 70. What do you want to do? I said, mentoring, which is what I'm doing now. Speaking, if they'll have me somewhere, somehow, which is what I'm doing now, without titles. And traveling around to encourage missionaries globally, which I'm doing now. And so just to name the three, those things I will continue to be who I am, and sharing the gospel, being evangelistic. Those four things has nothing to do with my title, but I want to do that with all generations. And the one thing that I say to young leaders is, you need to understand, regardless of how successful you are, there's these TikTok, I don't know if they're TikTok followers, but Christian and Michaela, my kids, they went to 50 states in 50 days. I don't know if you know who they are. Yeah. and they were only raised their goal was to raise $1 million, and they raised $12 million. And they got all these people sponsors and everything else, and I saw they did 20-minute clips every day, and they did their thing. And I said, well, are they famous? They said they're absolutely famous before they did this thing. So I say to people, whether you're famous or not famous, whether you use social platforms, etc., even if you achieve whatever that means, this is an example of me speaking to Gen Z or millennials. Even if you obtain everything, whatever that is, your goal is not that, because fame and popularity and power is fleeting, and they're not going to remember you anyways. This is me passing off. They're not going to remember you. I'd love to bring Reverend Dr. Debbie Turner Bell, who was one of the most famous people in 1990, who's on staff with us, right? And I love her. She was Miss America, 1990. And I love her, in her own words, where her daughter's, 14 or 15? And she takes them around and carpooling, and most of those girls have never even heard of Miss America, and they could care less. And what I mean is it's fading, right? So get off of yourself, is my word to the young people. Don't strive for that. It's tempting, but it won't. So you could succeed, and it won't deliver, right? It's all about you truly falling into your call, your intimacy with Jesus, making your impact in your place in the mission. You get that, you figure that out. And so I'm just using that as an example in our podcast of what I'm hoping to instill and what many in my age bracket should be doing. And if we bring together the cultures and what is the purpose of the future churches, the church is theirs. It is theirs. It's yours, yeah. Michael. It's yours. And you guys will decide what you can do with it. I can't. It's like me raising a child. They're adults now. I can only give my opinion. It's the same in the church. But if we bring both strengths together, I believe not only the future of the church is good and ready for whatever it faces, but each individual can live this devout life that we're all called to live regardless of our generation.
Amen to that. And I hope you are encouraged by this episode, no matter what generation you are. I think we all have a part to play, and we know that God is still in control no matter what happens. So we hope you have been encouraged by this episode. Again, however you discovered us, please follow along, subscribe to the podcast, and tune in for our upcoming episodes. And we hope you enjoyed this one, and we'll see you next time here on The Devout Route.